The Sinai Medical Foundation Oral History Project is being conducted by Leonard N. Simons Jewish Community Archives. My name is Michael Burke, and today's date is July 17th, 2024. I'm interviewing Dr. Stephen Arbit. Dr. Arbit, do you give permission to the Leonard M. Simons Jewish Community Archives to publish, duplicate, or otherwise use this recording for educational purposes or for use as deemed appropriate by the archives?
I do.
Good. So let's start at the beginning.
In the beginning, Bereshit.
Bereshit, where were you born, and what was it like growing up where you were born?
I was born in Detroit, raised until third grade in Oak Park, and then we moved to Southfield. And again, growing up in Southfield, it wasn't completely the shtetl, right? But, graduating class from Southfield Lathrop of 50% Jewish. We had sidewalks, things you don't get anymore. And it was a neighborhood, which is what we liked.
What neighborhood did you live in?
Beacon Square.
I lived in Beacon Square, too.
Did you? Where?
I lived right off of Arlington.
Okay, I was on Bradford Lane, which is right where Arlington curves.
Yeah. So you knew the Slutskys?
Of course. They were Marlene and Jerry? Arnold. He passed away, a year or two ago?
A couple years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, so small world that we live
right.
in. What was it like growing up in Southfield?
I mean, again, it was a nice community. I mean, I didn't know anything different, but I knew that we were surrounded by good people. We were, not necessarily to say that, Jews aren't the only good people, but we were surrounded by our own.
And we had a pool.
And we had the Beacon Square pool.
Yeah.
And then we'd go to Tamarack or we'd go to Walden in the summer in addition to the pool.
So what and when did you realize that you were interested in medicine and all that pretends?
So my father was a podiatrist. So, I saw him having patients and, sometimes they'd come into our home. I'd go with him to the office. I'd round with him in the hospitals. And then when I was 16, I got a job at North Detroit General Hospital, which is in Hamtramck. And
how did you get that job?
Nepotism, right? And my dad got me that job. So they trained me as a nurse's aide and orderly. So I learned to insert catheters, take blood pressures. I learned to do everything that even now my son, who's a physician, he never put in a catheter. He never did any of this stuff because they don't really train the medical students to do that because you really don't have to do it. But at 16, I learned how to do that and was doing all that. And my thought by getting a job in the hospital instead of going with my friends to be a counselor at Tamarack is that this was going to help me decide, do I want to go to medical school? Do I want to go to law school? My Zeta growing up said, listen, you have a choice. You can be a doctor, a dentist, or a lawyer, right? That was my three choices that he was allowing me to have. So that's kind of what happened. And then from there, I just was pretty much laser focused.
Mm-hmm. And so this job was the impetus, yeah?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning about what was going on, and I paid attention to everything and, had fun and at the same time and worked with some of my friends, also Sinai residents who work there because they got jobs from their uncles and things like that.
What was your awareness of Sinai when you were growing up?
Let me think how I want to put this nicely. Back when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, my parents were very much in the DO world. My uncle was a DO and I was born in a DO hospital. So everything was all about Ziegler Osteopathic and about Botsford Hospital. That was the place where all the education. In Sinai, it's not so good. So that's kind of what I had heard in my house growing up until getting to medical school and opening my eyes to seeing what was out there.
And when your eyes were opened, what did you find?
I got there as a third-year medical student when we start going into the hospitals, and it just was friendly people there were so nice, and the care that was being given, because again, we rounded at Hutzel, we rounded at Harper, we rounded at, again, Mount Carmel at the time, and Old Grace, or New Grace on 7 Mile, or at Outer Drive. We rounded all of those places, and it just was very homey.
And what was the reputation of Sinai in the community?
At that time, it was good. It really had a good reputation for medical education, for excellence in medical education, and for excellence in patient care.
What distinguished it in your mind, Steve?
In terms of what distinguished it, in terms of picking a residency, in terms of...
Yeah, picking a residency, and what made Sinai stand up above other hospitals in the community that enabled you to make a decision that Sinai was your home base?
I like the fact that there weren't crosses above the beds. I mean, again, it's not that I was uncomfortable if I trained there. I certainly work at hospitals currently with crosses above the beds, but it's still a little bit, foreign to me, much like if I was a Catholic and seeing the Jewish star, or a Muslim seeing the Jewish star. But it spoke to me. To have the sign when you walk in the main entrance from the Talmud, he who saves a single life is as though they saved the entire world.
Right.
That's important, that those kinds of things are important to me, and it made me feel comfortable.
Where'd you go to medical school?
Wayne State.
Yeah, and what was the experience there like?
Again, when you look at Wayne at the time, everything was going through transitions with the DMC, what was going on with clinical rotations, where they're doing clinical rotations, and so the experience at Wayne for the first 2 years is fine. You go down to classes, or you don't go down to classes. You go and you attend and you do that. But once you hit the clinics and you're able to pick and choose where you go, that was a wonderful experience, and being able to see what happens at Beaumont, spending time at Providence, spending time in choosing your rotations at Sinai.
Well, Wayne State, from my perspective, always had a fine reputation. Can you confirm that?
It does. And one of the things, for example, Bob Bloom, my program director when I did internal medicine, what he would say is you take the Wayne State students and compare them to the Michigan students from medical school. Clinically and hands-on, what the Wayne students can do are far superior than the Michigan students. Now, certainly with time, the Michigan students will catch up, but they didn't have the hands-on of what we learned and what we were able to do in the environment at Wayne compared to Michigan.
Now, was that a philosophy of the school, or was it?
They prided themselves on hands-on and getting these kids ready, or the students, ready to start once they get done with their residency, to get into residency.
No regrets going to Wayne State's medical school. I assume that Michigan was in your mind's eye when you made the decision. So what made you decide to go to Wayne State instead of?
I had gotten into when I went to Michigan State. I always said, gee, I would love to go to Wayne Medical School. That was where I thought I wanted to go. So really, really early in the process of getting into medical schools and interviewing, I got into Loyola, for example, in the end of October, early November of my senior year, which is very early. So right away I knew I was going into medical school. The next one I got into Wayne, which was the end of November. I'm done. I canceled all my interviews, didn't interview anywhere else, and says I'm comfortable. I'm going to Wayne. And
was osteopathy ever a consideration? Understanding your background?
Yeah, I applied. And the interesting thing is I did not fit the mold at the time at Michigan State for the College of Osteopathic Medicine. I was too young. The average entry at that time was 26. And I have an early birthday, or late birthday in September, so I was young. I had no life experience other than school. So I don't even think they interviewed. Or did I get interviewed? I didn't think I got. I mean, after going to Michigan State, my recollection is they didn't really want me, and it is what it is. That's where my son went, but they wanted him, not me.
And what led you to Sinai in the final analysis when you got out of medical school and needed to start your journey as a practicing physician?
I mean, the program in physical medicine and rehabilitation at Sinai was far superior than anything else in the state, and one of the top training places in the country.
Define that for me.
I mean, the education and the training that we received today, me and Brian Roth, one of my partners who we trained together, you can tell the physician who trained in the training program, because we think a little differently. It's very much, I mean, Joe Hahn had beat into us that you had to do things, it had to be done a certain way, it had to be done meticulously, and that's kind of how we trained him and what we do. And listen, I'm not saying anything wrong about people who trained at Beaumont, but you can look at the notes, at least from the old school Sinai guys, and how it's different than some of the other.
So what was Sinai's when you started? I mean, you're younger than many of the other doctors that I've interviewed.
Sure.
What was Sinai Hospital's reputation when you first arrived?
I think the true glory days of Sinai kind of had moved on a little bit. Some of the residencies had already left. There was no urology anymore. All the work there was the tail end of a lot of the research being done by Adrian Kantrowicz and James, the other guy who was doing lipids with Mel Rubenfire, James Milchevsky, I think. I can't remember his name exactly. But that kind of was already petering out.
Because?
I think the finances of being an independent hospital was a struggle. And then at the time of me being there a year or two, the board brought in the Hunter Group, which was a national accounting firm, or a firm that does turnaround for hospitals. I mean, again, as a 24, 25-year-old, I was aware of, more so than others, of the businesses of what was going on. So there was the Woodland Medical Group. So there was an opportunity, this is what my recollection is, there was an opportunity to Sinai to buy Woodland and bring all those physicians in. And Irv Shapiro, if I recall, was Irv Shapiro, the president, CEO, decided he didn't want to do that. The DMC bought it. And so that entire group of huge amount of internists and specialists no longer went to Sinai, but they went to Grace Hospital, which then when they merged with Mount Carmel became the new Grace Hospital at Mount Carmel's campus. That took a huge section of patients away. The hospital was struggling, so they brought the turnaround group, the Hunter Group. They made significant amount of cuts into, not services, so to speak, but in terms of, they thought there was fat. Cut this, cut that, cut this. And that led to the eventual sale of the hospital.
What role do you think, in this dynamic that you're describing, did the demographics of the community play into it?
Well, I think the demographics kind of changed. I think, and that's why ultimately Sinai Hospital was chosen as the two hospitals left between the Grace Hospital campus and Sinai, is because, again, my understanding and my recollection is that when the DMC had bought it, they were talking, and Mayor Archer and everybody who was involved kind of in that decision felt that the community looked at Grace Hospital as their hospital, and whereas Sinai was more of the other community that people were coming in. So when they chose to close one of the two hospitals, that's part of the reason why Sinai closed. Even though Sinai was newer, it had, some of the buildings were built after the riots in the early 70s in terms of the Fisher Wing and all that.
What about the fact that the Jewish community were choosing other alternatives to go to hospitals.
Well, but that, again, that was also, part of it, that they were going to the Providences, they were going to the Beaumonts as Beaumont was building their, 1,000-bed hospital. Do you have a Beaumont doctor, right? Their marketing was fantastic. And then along the way, when, the Hunter Group was there, and then they brought in Phil Shanegold to be president. And what did Phil Shanegold do? When he was in St. Louis, he prepared the hospital that he worked at for the sale. So you kind of had this understanding, the writing was on the wall of what was going to be happening.
Now, they were talking at the time, and I think you will recall it because you were probably kind of in the middle of it, of building a satellite hospital, a satellite Sinai out in West Bloomfield.
With Henry Ford.
Yeah, and they made the decision not to do that. Were you happy with that decision, or were you concerned about that decision?
I think that would have been wonderful. I thought that would have been fantastic because it would have taken the Sinai name, the Sinai medical staff, and again, however Henry Ford with their closed medical staff and how their system works differently than most hospital systems are because they're an employed physician model, that would have been wonderful to continue then the legacy of what started with Sinai on Outer Drive.
Disappointed that it didn't happen?
Yeah, they always kind of threw it out there, it's going to happen, oh, we think it's happening, we have the land, this is right across from the JCC, what a perfect place, this is good. Until you brought it up, I completely forgot about that.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
So were you disappointed that
Yes.
it didn't happen?
Yes.
And it's hard to be a fortune teller. What do you think the dynamics of this community would have been had they built that satellite hospital out in West Bloomfield?
Again, our community had been moving northwest forever, right? It went from being Oak Park to Southfield to building the Jewish Community Center at Maple and Drake. And so it would have just continued cementing, moving in that direction.
Yeah. Taking a step back, I'm interested in the dynamics of the hospital. When you were there, Jewish and non-Jewish staff, how did everyone get along? Was it a unique situation in your opinion?
It was. I again, coming from being Jewish, there were, except for a few incidences, there were no issues with any anti-Semitism or things like that. In fact, I spent 6 hours in a car with Steve Shanebaum, who graduated residency a year behind me, and he's an ophthalmologist. And he refreshed my memory that there were two instances that he remembered, and then all of a sudden I remembered of there was some anti-Semitism with two of the residents that occurred, which was kind of, we didn't see it that much, but it certainly happened.
Mm-hmm. You want to elaborate a little bit?
Again, it is what it is. It was a couple of the Muslim, the residents, and said some things, and, listen, it happens, and we didn't make a big deal out of it. We didn't, go to anybody and say, oh, they said, it is what it is. Uneducated people sometimes make bad choices of what they say.
What positions did you hold when you were at Sinai?
Well, I did 2 residencies at Sinai for training. I did 3 years of internal medicine, and then I did 3 years of PM&R. I was president of the House Staff Council for 4 of those years, I think.
What does that mean? I don't know.
The House Staff Council is a liaison between the residents and administration. So if there's issues that the residents bring up, everything from the mundane of saying, the cafeteria, we need this and this and this differently, to sitting on meetings of residents if there's issues or sanctions that need to be made and things like that. So did some of that. I've always enjoyed doing things where I do some kind of administrative type stuff.
Mm-hmm. And what area of medicine did you decide to finally go into, and why?
Well, physical medicine and rehabilitation is what I ended up doing, and that's what I wanted to do really
Right from the beginning?
Not from the beginning of medical school. I know I liked the musculoskeletal system. I was thinking about even OB-GYN, thinking about maybe internal medicine, and then I decided that I really wanted to go into physical medicine. I was introduced to that at Michigan State. One of my friends, Jimmy Honnett, his father was Joe Honnett, so I kind of got introduced to that early on. And I got married about, in June of 1988, graduated medical school right at the same time, and we were both very young, and my wife said, listen, you can train anywhere you want as long as it's within the Tri-County area. So when I'm looking at residencies that really kind of went down to Beaumont and to Sinai, and I know that the program director at Sinai, Maury Ellenberg, he did internal medicine before he went into PM&R, and had a couple other of the residents did that. So before I put my match in, I figured, let me just do this. Asked him if he would take me to do PM&R after doing 3 years of internal medicine.
Was Sinai still a viable entity when you were in that position, or were they? Was the rumor out on the street that they were going elsewhere?
Not at that time. I mean, that was really earlier. You know, as a medical student, I don't really know that I had any insight into the health of a hospital. And so, as far as I knew, it was all good to go, and things were chugging along. And
was your decision impacted as you moved down the road? Or did you finish your whole residency?
Finished my whole residency, and then I stayed on as staff for a year or so. No, actually I actually worked at Sinai for a year, took a part-time job as I was opening up my own practice, and then for the next year, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, when you can limit your competition, sometimes that works out well for you. So I didn't get resident coverage to do consults. I didn't get a lot of other things that I think I should have been availed upon me to get to continue there. The group that was there didn't want anybody else there, so I said, okay, it is what it is.
So near the end of this period in your life, I would assume that the rumor mill was surfacing. How did the doctors in the hospital feel about the fact that rumors were out there that Sinai was going to be sold?
No one likes instability, right? Everybody likes things to be stable, to know you have a home, to work, to know you have a place. So at the same time, no one wants to be the last one off a ship that's sinking, right? So you saw physicians starting to look around and starting to leave and to move on to the other systems within the area.
Did that impact on the care that patients were getting in the hospital?
I don't think so, because the doctors were still caring for their patients, so I don't think that was an issue.
Where did you end up going? Where did you decide to go once the Sinai?
Huron Valley.
Yeah.
So at the time it didn't have the Sinai name, but after being there a couple years and Sinai was closing, and part of the deal they made with all the communities was the Sinai name would continue both at now Sinai Grace and Huron Valley Sinai Hospital.
Was Sinai Grace in your perspective too, or did you?
No, because after doing 3 years of internal medicine while I was a PM&R resident, I did a fair amount of moonlighting as an internist out at Huron Valley. So I was meeting the community of physicians there, some of them who didn't even know what a physical medicine doctor was. And so I got to meet them, so it was natural for me then just to continue out there. So I went into a timeshare. I got a phone call from Joe Honnett towards the end of my residency saying, hey, we need some help. Do you want to take a part-time job? And I said, perfect. So I did that part-time, and then
Did you feel that you got what you needed out of Huron Valley?
Yes. And in fact, if I look around at the medical staff at Huron Valley, a significant portion of them are expats from Sinai.
When it was determined that there would not be another Sinai hospital, that the hospital was closing, and you learned that the proceeds from that were going to go into a foundation to support the well-being of the community, how did you feel about that?
That's wonderful. I mean, though the structure of Sinai, where it is then, where it was and what it was, that money is continuing out there to then provide benefits for a multitude of people.
Are you pleased that it's not only supporting Jewish things, but the general community?
Well, yes, if you think about Sinai supported the community who lived around there, both economically with jobs, with health care, with community support of education, and other, whether it was the School of Nursing and all the other things that went along with the hospital itself, it's continuing now just in a different way.
And you're happy with the way the money is being spent in general?
In terms of what we're doing as an organization, yes, but don't forget, what was that? I don't remember, it was $6 million, $3 million, whatever, $60 million
That was a lot of money.
went into the Sinai Fund, which is being dispersed to help others within the community.
Are you playing any role in the Sinai Fund?
Not in the Sinai Fund in and of itself, but what we're doing through the Sinai Medical Staff Foundation.
Tell me about that.
So I was brought in or asked to join 2 years ago, I think, and we have a fund of money that is all for medical things, and people give us proposals of what they want to do with the money. We have X amount of dollars that we're able to disperse on a twice yearly basis because we don't want to dip into our nest egg, so to speak, and we're giving it to different organizations in the community.
Give me an example of some of the things that you funded. And what role are you playing in this committee that you...
I'm on the board. There's, I think, 20 of us now, and we've done some OB-GYN equipment for a clinic. We've supported the Gary Bernstein, largest free clinic in the state of Michigan, which is in Pontiac. We've supported some educational conferences and different things that we get asked to look. We look at it and we decide.
Tell me about the brick.
Ask me about my brick.
So Steve, before we get on to anything else, tell me about the brick.
I got a brick. This is a brick from Sinai Hospital. My brother, got it, good, can we see it? This is actually one of the bricks from the buildings during the demolition. Good, high enough?
Yeah.
Okay, this is one of the bricks. My brother, who's an anesthesiologist, one of his patients, he was talking to him, and he said that he lived near there, and he happened to grab a couple bricks, and my brother said, "Can I get them?" And he said, "Sure." So we got 2 bricks, and my brother had it engraved, and
What does it say?
It says Sinai Hospital, Detroit, 6767 West Outer Drive, January 1953, April 1999. Quote, "He who saves a single life is as if he saved the world," and it says the Talmud. So this to me is really, really cool. I mean, I spent a lot of my time at Sinai, and it just means so much to me to have this. So this is in my office, right above my brick from the Olympia. So it's not below it.
Hockey and Sinai.
There you go. So yeah, I really like this.
What was your favorite part of working at Sinai?
I mean, I've made lifelong friends there, I think that, and I'm still friends with a lot of people. And I think it was just the people that were there that made it so warm and so friendly. And I mean, I'll never forget that I was a medical student, and I was there as a 3rd year, and Sheldon Gonti, who's an ophthalmologist, was one of the 4th years. And he was talking about Eric Zonder of blessed memory, who was an internist, and he called him Eric. And I said, you called him by his first name? He goes, oh yeah, we call all the attendings by their first name. That's what we do. And again, it's just nice. It was warm. It was friendly, which was really, really nice. And I liked that. And plus the education that I got was wonderful. The didactics, the lectures, the everything, and plus the hands-on. I mean, what we were able to do as a resident in terms of the number of shoulder injections, knee injections that I did, the number of EMGs that we did, some of my partners who trained at other places, and even some of my newer partners who are in their 30s, trained at Beaumont. And they said, oh, they're private practice patients. We can't do anything. And I think I did one shoulder injection. I mean, at Sinai, these were all private practice patients too, but they said, we're training, you gotta, and if someone said no, it was no, but for the most part, they let us do. And so technically, we were able to do so much.
Sounds like there was a humanity at Sinai that may not be visible at some of the other hospitals around the city.
Well, I can't really talk for training in other places in terms of residency, but there certainly was at Sinai.
Is there anything you didn't like about working at Sinai?
A little bit of a drive, living, but where we did, but no, listen, it was really nice. And again, some of the instability towards the end, it was a little bit, is what it is, but that happens whenever there's change.
Yeah. Who are some of the names and the people that stand out to you as being mentors, friends, as you entered your career and even moved on in your career? We'd like to put in plugs for those guys.
There you go. So again, Joe Honnett, who was our chairman of our department, nationally known, was president of the American Academy of PM&R, very well respected. Maury Ellenberg was our program director. And Gary Chodoroff, who retired a couple years ago, was a mentor of mine. Mel Rubenfire, when I did internal medicine. Just really, what a wonderful man, a wonderful human being, a phenomenal cardiologist, and a wonderful educator. I can't speak highly enough about Mel.
I want to tell you, first of all, he was my doctor at one time. That's number one. Number two, he's been interviewed by this. And number three, you're not the first person who's mentioned his name as...
But did he mention mine?
I think so.
Okay, perfect. Then we're good.
I think he... one last thing before... anything that we haven't talked about, number one, that you'd like to talk about?
No, I mean, I think we hit on everything. I mean, it just was such a warm, friendly place.
All right, I like to end these things by having you talk about your family and the influence that they've had on your career and your whole family dynamic. Sure. If you want to spend a few moments on that.
Sure. Well, all three of my boys were born at Sinai, which, was wonderful. They all spent time with me, even as a resident. When I would go in and round, I would take them in sometimes to show them hospitals, show them things, and they were young, but, getting to see. One of my sons, Evan, and I'm naming him by name, but he followed me and he's finishing up his residency in physical medicine and hopefully will be joining us back in practice in a year or two. And Noah, who is my 28-year-old state rep for West Bloomfield.
Politics.
And, again, watching what I do and having an understanding of medicine is helping him when it comes to legislative things, that he's able to do, which I think is wonderful. And I think the smartest one of all is the one who's not in medicine and not in politics. He works for Tesla. That's Alec. Okay. And I don't want to not mention my wife. We've been married for 36 years. And so she's been... And
her name?
Edie. So she was, with me throughout training and throughout medical school. We met in medical school.
And throughout the births of your three boys.
She was there. Yes, she was there for all three of them.
Well, it sounds like it's been an interesting life and an interesting career.
You know, it is, and it's
And Sinai has played an important role. If you had to describe the role, the importance of Sinai in kind of your molding as a doctor and as a human being, how would you describe that, Steve?
Well, I just think that, you know, Sinai had this, at the end of the day, there was some goodness, and that showed people how to be, Hamish, how to be not only you caring for the person, for their medical things, but to care for them as an entire person, I think, which was important. You know, again, one of my partners, Brian Roth, and we trained together. And, you know, so again, you continue with people that you're familiar with and people who've had the same similar background as you move forward.
Yeah, good. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of the archives. And it's been a pleasure.
I want to tell you, if you're looking for a second career,
Yeah.
I think this fits you quite well.
Yeah, you think so?
Well, maybe not, but that's okay.